Welcome to another episode of The Halal Gap. I'm your co-host, Sikandar, and I'm joined as always by...
your other co-host, Sofia Alani.
And... you got to say his name too.
Oh yeah, and always the man behind the mic, Hamada, where are you at? Sup?
That's clearly not Hamada, but that's okay. It's okay. He's here, guys. He's here. We have an incredible episode for you today. Enjoy.
She is a Pakistani-American podcast host, writer, and producer who is executive producing the upcoming Michelle Obama podcast with her production company Dustlight Productions, and is the creator of the widely acclaimed podcast Tell Them I Am. Featured in the LA Business Journal as one of their 20 in their 20s and named Producer of the Year by Adweek in 2019, she has taken the podcast world by storm. Joining us today all the way from Los Angeles, California, please welcome Misha Euceph.
Woo! Woo! All right.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hello.
This is so exciting.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, before we jump into your background, in classic Tell Them I Am fashion, I want to ask you, what are you best known for?
People love doing this.
I want to turn the tables on you a little bit.
People love doing this to me. I would say I'm best known for making shows that are too personal for comfort.
Love it. I love that.
Excellent.
I love that.
So we're getting into it today is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys ask me the right questions, we might. I don't know.
Okay.
Excellent.
Oh, pressure's on.
Yeah, no big deal. Okay. We'll do our best. So, tell us about yourself. Tell us your origin story.
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up? What's your family like? Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in Karachi, Pakistan. I was born in Rawalpindi, and then my parents moved to Karachi when I was around 4 years old because they kind of wanted to establish their own home and identity separate from their respective families. They're both pretty close with their families, but I think they felt like they just kind of wanted to raise us a little bit differently than what was maybe expected. And, my dad is an artist and an entrepreneur. And my mom was a professor at the time, is a special education teacher now. And I think being career oriented and community oriented and led by integrity and being leaders in their community was really important to them. So in order to do that, they felt like being in Karachi was the right move. And then in 2003, we unexpectedly moved to the United States. And it's so funny because I've talked about this story so much in Beginner, my first independent podcast, and also in interviews. But I still haven't sat my parents down and asked them if it was an accident or on purpose, if they lied to us. But we came here for a 12-day vacation in 2003. And we were supposed to pick up our passports because we had been going through the whole citizenship process. My dad was a citizen and he was sponsoring us. And we ended up just staying. We never went back and got our stuff or any of that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really wild. And I've only actually been back once in 2008 when I was 16 by myself and had to crowdfund to go back to Pakistan because my parents refused to pay for it. Because they were like, you just want to go hang out.
Wait, why?
What?
Yeah. No. But do you still have a lot of family back in Pakistan, or why?
Yeah.
Was it a conscious decision not to go back by your family, or what?
I'm not 100% sure. It's I think my parents really felt burned by some people they're very close to it in Pakistan, and I think that when they do go back, I think they really want to go back and really explore Pakistan, the rural areas, and get to know the ancient ruin sites and all of that, see Pakistan the way that it hasn't really been seen. And I think that that's very hard when you have some family and they have expectations of you to come visit them and, they're all those shadi attend and whatnot. So I think they haven't gone back because they haven't quite figured out how to manage those two things and how to reconcile that. Do they go back and not tell anybody or what? But yeah, I think there is some level of I think money's always a factor and life just gets in the way. Now we're in quarantine, but I think there is some level of feeling, I don't know, disillusioned or something. So I think that's why they haven't gone back. My mom did go back a year after we moved here, with my little brother at the time, to pack up some of our like basic belongings and bring them over and sell some stuff. So yeah, when 2008 rolled around and I was just like all of a sudden really feeling eager to go back to Pakistan, my parents didn't want to go with me, and I think their schedules and, you know, financial situation didn't permit it. And I was like a teenager who like really wanted to see my friends.
So like, what was that like?
Yeah. What was what like?
I was just gonna say, like, what was that like at the age of 11, if I'm doing my math right?
Yeah.
You leave home to go on a 12-day trip and then just never go back. Like, that must have been pretty disorienting. And like, did you miss your friends? And like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was so disorienting. Like, I just was like, what the fuck, guys? Like, why? Why did you do this to me? You know? And like, when we first moved here, we actually moved into my uncle's house for like a month or so, in Santee, which is like a very white working class military town. It has often been known by some people as Clan T, to give you a sense of what the landscape there is like.
Excellent.
And so that was even more disorienting. And like, we were, you know, like we're upper middle class in Pakistan. My parents were doing well. They were well known. And me and my sister were popular in school. We didn't have a lot of like obstacles, and we had a lot of privilege. So to come here and all of a sudden just automatically be like in middle school, in this super white town, and to not really understand what is happening or like why we're staying here. And then my parents moved to LA, to Palos Verdes, which is like an upper middle class, also like mostly white and Asian place. And it's different because people are more cultured. They knew what Pakistan was and weren't like, oh, like, did you have electricity or whatever? But we still didn't have wealth, you know, so we weren't cool. And automatically we're like relegated to this like loser class. And I think that as a kid who's like just about to hit puberty, it was really, really disorienting.
Mm-hmm. And like coming to the US too, like 2 years after 9/11, like did you, obviously you mentioned like Clan T, like that must have been pretty rough, but like even moving to LA, was there a lot of any sort of racism and stuff that you faced?
You know, at the time I didn't know it was racism. So I now look back and I'm like, oh, the way that people spoke to me and my sister, or the fact that people didn't want to hang out with me, or like, you know, like how you're just like somebody, how somebody looks at you, things that are like now called microaggressions. I wasn't conscious of that stuff, like, because nobody was like outright bullying me or like hitting me or whatever. There was one instance that really sticks in my memory, or maybe a couple of instances, one of which there was this like kid named Chris who sat behind me in language arts class in 6th grade. And he would like always make fun of my buck teeth and my accent. So there was that kind of discrimination, but it never felt like super intense. I do think that there was a weird thing about being Muslim post 9/11 and moving here as an immigrant, because I went around just saying that I was like basically Indian, you know, so I didn't have to explain or justify anything. Yeah.
Yeah. What about as it relates to the idea of storytelling? Is that something that's always been a part of you as you were growing up? Even was it, you know, were you always interested in telling stories and in sharing stories, or is that something that developed later? Or
I mean, my parents will probably tell you I've always been a huge exaggerator. Like,
yeah,
they have this story of like me going to like a party at a friend's house when I was like, I don't know, 5, maybe 6 years old with my little sister. And I came back and they were like, oh, like, how was the party? And my sister, you know, was saying something generic. And I was like, oh, like, they asked me to dance like 10 million thousand times. Like, it's just this like ridiculous little thing. I think that they have always seen me as somebody who like gets very animated when I am talking about things that are happening in my life or in other people's lives. Gossip is, like many Pakistani families, is a huge part of our family. So there's many a trip to somebody's house where like in the car ride back, like we have to like, trade notes and talk about everything.
Debrief on
So I think like telling stories in that basic kind of way was really important to us always.
Yeah.
But then like I also grew up with parents who like are huge consumers of the arts. Like one of the first cassettes that they exchanged with each other was like an Abda Parveen cassette. And my dad, played music my whole life and was like super into movies. And he would make us watch all these movies that he loved, like Back to the Future. And he was telling us to read like A Rose from Emily, which I think is a Faulkner short story, at like a really, really young age. I remember reading Jane Eyre when I was like in 4th grade, which is kind of insane, So
Yeah, wow.
I think that was always just like a part of like who we were as a family, but in a formal kind of way, telling stories didn't really take hold until my senior year of college.
And was podcasting your kind of conduit, your gateway towards that, like as a medium of sharing kind of more formal stories, or was it more broad than that? And then you later found podcasting. Like how did podcasting fit into all of that?
I think it was kind of like always it was like my first love in terms of mediums.
Yeah.
I do think I'm a writer first, but that's because like to frankly play in any medium, you have to be a writer. I think that, NPR was always in the background in our house. And my parents were big fans of Radio Pakistan, like back in the day. And I used to apply to like NPR internships when I was in high school, even though I like didn't get any of them. And I don't think I was ever even eligible for any of them. Like it was this like weird, like little obsession I had. And I remember like the first time I called into the Pat Morrison show on KPCC, and like how much that meant to me. So I think when in college I was going through kind of like an existential crisis and realizing that like maybe I didn't want to go to law school, which I had thought was my path because that's like what somebody does if they're like interested in writing and studied philosophy and like, I don't know. I just thought that was like the professional path that you take. I started just talking to friends and professors and my parents, and NPR kind of became pretty quickly like evident as the thing that like made my eyes light up, or my face light up. And I decided to take a quarter off from school in my senior year. And at that time it was like journalism broadly that I was thinking, but I really always wanted to go into radio. And at that time, podcasting wasn't really a thing. There was no Serial or anything. So I took a quarter off from school and made this radio show at UC Irvine where I was going to college. And that's all I did, like for a whole quarter. I just like worked on that radio show, and it was called Dates and Other Mistakes. And it was about like love, essentially. It was totally ridiculous and like not very good, but I remember that was the first time I like made something where I liked the bad parts of it, or did something where I was like, oh, the hard parts don't feel like a chore. There's like a joy in that too.
Right. Yeah.
So speaking of like so that was your kind of first pancake, was that Dates and Other Mistakes, which great title, by the way. And then your first project that we know about is Beginner, which was a podcast or do you want to talk about it instead of me talking about it?
I'd love to hear you talk about it and just see how you describe it, actually.
Okay, well, so you talk about on this podcast, which like the teaser trailer was like the cutest thing. Was that your little brother?
Yeah, I paid him.
Who recorded that? Really?
You paid him? Oh,
how much?
goodness.
How many dollars did he make?
He made $20, and then he made my parents match it.
So he's a
interview him
business-minded,
next. Yeah.
entrepreneur over here.
Yeah, you might want to.
So Yeah, you'll have to hook us up. Among the many excellent contacts you have, please give us your little brother's number. But yeah, so basically you talk about, it's a podcast where you talk about your experience immigrating to the US at like as a teen, or like not quite, and all of the things that you felt that you missed out on, like these childhood experiences or skills like swimming and riding your bike and stuff that other kids your age could do, and you didn't know how to, and you felt that there was kind of like you lacked a sense of belonging because of that. And so you recorded this podcast, and is it 10 episodes?
I think it was like 9.5 episodes or something.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Sophia. God.
Sorry.
9.5.
And so 9.5 episodes, and in each one you learn a new skill and kind of like talk about belonging and like your experience, and I thought it was really, really cool, and I thought that was like such a neat idea. So kind of what inspired you to do that?
Yeah. Well, I was at the time I was in a relationship with somebody who is Jewish, and he could do a lot of the things that I couldn't do. Like he could ride a bike, and he would go like kayaking and swimming, and we were actually on vacation together, and I hadn't really come out as like, oh, I can't really swim and definitely can't swim in the ocean. And it just came up like when we went running on the beach, and like he was like, let's go like in the water, and I was like, no. And we started talking about it, and it just became clear that there were so many things I didn't know how to do, and that a lot of my feeling of like inadequacy or insecurity around like not being good enough and not feeling like I belong within my friend groups or, a lot of social settings was stemming from this idea that like I didn't know these like quintessentially American things. After he and I came back from vacation, I just decided to actually make my first podcast on that. I had been thinking about like making a podcast, and my ex was very encouraging about that because he was like, if you want to go into podcasting, you should just make a show. And I'd been really struggling to get internships at traditional podcasting institutions. So I had a job at the time at SiriusXM, and I decided to, on the side, start like working on this show. And it became this like amazing cathartic experience where like I got to explore so much about my relationships with my family, about my heritage, about my relationship with Americanness, all happening in, with the backdrop of Trump being elected, which was totally accidental. Like I did not set out to make a podcast about being an immigrant and what it means to belong in America in 2017. Yeah, it ended up being just like a very therapeutic experience for me. And it's also where I learned like so many things about how to make a podcast, and the business of podcasting.
And around that same time, you touched on it, Trump was getting elected at the time, and you wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal called "How Progressives Tokenize the Hijab." Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that for those who haven't had a chance to read that article yet, and then also why that topic is so important to you?
Yeah, it's funny because around that time I was really starting to like put out a lot of work, and that's something I'd been thinking about for a long time. It's so interesting actually that you asked me about that in this political moment, because I think now we're reckoning with race, right? And we're like talking about not just like white supremacists and Republicans and conservatives to a lesser extent, and how they are racist or perpetuating racist power structures. But now we're starting to talk about like the Karens, right? And like the liberal white people who think that they're in your corner and are trying so desperately to help you and be your little savior, but actually like still don't treat you like a human being, like a multidimensional human being, and still treat you like a monolith. So I think that I was just thinking about that idea, and that eventually manifested itself in Beginner and that op-ed and in Tell Them I Am, of how we're all so different. And so many progressives like get such a pat on the back for being so supportive and woke and whatnot. And actually they're just like, dehumanizing us in a different, more subtle way. I also have been very conscious of the hijab as somebody who moved here from Pakistan and moved here post 9/11. And growing up in Pakistan, like I honestly didn't know a single person who wore a hijab, and then came to the US and everybody was wearing a hijab. And I was really confused by that. Like I didn't really understand like whether people were more religious or whether they were holding on to religion in a different way. And I felt like it's not reflective of Muslims to only prop up people who are hijabis, because there's so many different kinds of Muslims, that one type of Muslim can't be representative of all of us. So I think that's where that came from. And it's themes that I started wrestling with around that time, but probably had been brewing since I moved here, and then have started to really manifest things like Tell Them I Am.
Yeah, no, and that exactly. I mean, that idea of Muslims transcending categories is also, so central to our existence on the Mosquers. And as you mentioned, is the central theme really of your podcast, Tell Them I Am, which for those who don't know, you produced and hosted last year, and that Time and HuffPo and several others have considered one of the best podcasts of 2019, which I would wholeheartedly agree with. So first of all, congratulations on such an incredible project that you started last year. And for those who haven't heard it, now's your time to probably put this podcast on pause, go listen to the episodes, and then come back. But I wanted to ask something about Tell Them I Am specifically as it relates to the format that you decided to pursue with that, right? Rather than kind of long format interviews like we do, you decided to showcase these short kind of 15-minute-ish stories of defining moments in people's lives. Why was that the approach you decided to take?
Yeah. So, full disclosure, Tell Them I Am is not originally the show that I wanted to make. What I really have always wanted to do is what I am going to actually start doing on August 7th, which is called the Quran Book Club. I've had like a weird obsession with Islamic philosophy and like the scholarship around the Quran and poetry that was eventually inspired by the Quran, and how the practice of Islam has like really changed over time. And it's interesting because I'm like a very culturally Muslim person. Like I drink, I've been in relationships, whatever, all the things that you're not supposed to do, I have done, and I don't feel ashamed for any of that. So I'm not aspiring to be a good Muslim in, say, the way that like maybe Rami, the character in his TV show, is trying to be. But that said, I've had a fascination with this, and I really, really have wanted other people to see the Quran the way that I have had the privilege of seeing it, which is a really, really beautiful work of poetry, a very inspired treatise on how to treat people and how to establish a just government, all in one. Like, I think it's a miraculous text, So that's what I really wanted to make. I wanted to make like a more perfect style podcast that was like super narratively rich and well researched and reported, that helped people understand the Quran in a deeper way and as the beautiful thing that it is. But I realized that we as a society weren't actually at that level. Like we weren't there yet. People see Muslims as so one-dimensional, and they don't even fully understand us as people. And so many people don't know any Muslims in an intimate way. So I realized that there was like a first step that needed to happen. And that's where the idea of Tell Them I Am came about, where I was like, okay, what if there's a podcast where every day of Ramzan, an episode came out and you got to know a different Muslim person intimately. And the reason I decided not to do that as a interview format is because I have been trained in like narrative mostly, and like I wanted to give the guests a lot of room to tell their own story, and then also have the ability to play with it. Like I make like kind of like audio movies or audio TV,
Yeah, no, the production is incredible. I mean, it is very much like an audio movie.
Thank you. Yeah, my team deserves so much credit for that. I so that's something I wanted to do. Like I wanted to have an original score and, like really make it beautiful to listen to, like candy. And then when I pitched this idea to my team, we really talked about all the different ways the format could work. And central to this idea was we didn't want it to be about being Muslim or about Islamophobia or about things on a platter about identity. We wanted people to get to know someone the way that you get to know somebody after like years of knowing them, like sitting at like 2 a.m. in your backyard, and so we were like, well, how do we cut to that? Like, how do you get to know somebody that intimately, but over a quick little bite-sized story? And that's where Arwen Nix actually suggested that we center it on this question of like, what's a small moment that defines who you are? And then with my team, that, concept evolved a little bit more. And at one point we were going to make them non-narrated episodes. And then we realized that there was no continuity from episode to episode. So my team suggested that I actually host the show. And we came up with these like Sex and the City anecdotes, which had never really been done before in podcasting, but felt very unique and true to the podcast, to tell them I am. So that's kind of how the format came about. It was more of a roundabout way, but I think it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so there was so you mentioned that the way that it kind of evolved and stuff wasn't your initial plan, but one of the things that does seem to have stuck is the fact that it was during the month of Ramadan. So why was that important to you?
Because I think in Ramzan we have like so much community, and we also have so much spotlight on us. Like I often see in Ramzan that like people are writing articles about like what is Ramzan and like what to do to break your fast, or like how to be respectful of your Muslim friend, like these like very generic basic articles that you see every single year. And I wanted to make something that was a step beyond that created a sense of community for everybody to like, like if you have an episode that drops at 4 a.m. when you're about to like start your sari or whatever, and then you can talk with your friends about it. Like that's a beautiful way to form community that isn't restrictive in terms of like how religious you are, right? Like not everyone goes to Tarawih. Not everyone is like reading the Quran for hours a day or whatever. So it felt like it was for any kind of Muslim. And it also felt like it was a better form of spotlighting Muslims than what already existed out there for people who were non-Muslim. Like I would rather that my white friends get to know my culture and religious heritage through getting to know these beautiful people and these intimate, sound-rich stories, rather than, reading an article about like, what is Ramadan? That's why it stuck.
That is so I don't know what the right way of saying it, but it's so in line with what our intention is with the Mosquers too, which is why, I thought it was so important for us to have this conversation together, because, over the course of now 14 years with our festival, we've evolved significantly, both in terms of, the attendance, but also the types of stories that we're showcasing, because what we're finding is that there are these incredibly diverse stories that are being shared from around the world, which, in some ways are shaped by faith, but in other ways are just stories that creative Muslims are wanting to tell. And I think something that we've had to reconcile with the community is that, it's not a matter of, liberal or conservative Muslims. It's more so just a matter of like approaching it with an open mind, rather than hitting people with doctrine, you hit them with the diversity of the people. And I think you end up showcasing a lot better perspective of what a Muslim is in that situation than if, like you said, just shared an article about here's how we do Ramadan, right? So no, I completely agree with you as it relates to that. And I think another thing that, you mentioned in kind of, you alluded to it with like these Sex and the City type anecdotes, you kind of talk a lot about your own life throughout the podcast, and more specifically, as you mentioned, you don't try to you make it clear that you don't fall under any sort of cookie cutter definition of what a Muslim may look or act like, right? And that's just, that's who you are. So was that a conscious decision by you and your team to try to normalize that, or is that just kind of a reflection of who you are?
I think it was both. I think it was definitely both. I used to feel ashamed for making work that was personal, because I thought that the highest level of making art is making something where you can step into other people's shoes. And I think maybe it's reflective of our generation, or, just the fact that there aren't that many stories out there from Muslims where we see the full complexity of who they are. But I started to realize it was really important for me to share my story in all of its like messy glory, right? Like it was important for me to admit both that I drink, but that I'm also not sure whether that's something I want to do or continue doing. And that like maybe I do feel like my faith has some guidelines around that are very, very understandable and probably would lead to a better life, And so I think like part of the goal was to normalize things, but I think part of it is also to just be like, hey, like I'm telling my story, I'm being brave and being willing to take whatever criticism comes my way from any kind of Muslim or non-Muslim, so that you feel emboldened to then share these things with your friends and your family and your community, and maybe openly at work, or if you're also somebody who's in, the media or like a public type of profession, then in that context. Because I think that we open ourselves up to being demonized as long as we try to like portray ourselves as not flawed, So if we really want to battle hate, like we got to be upfront about who we are. And I think that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, no, and that's such a good point. And I also wonder, like, with Tell Them I Am and with Beginner and everything, and even with this Quran book club that you're starting, it kind of seems like you are really wanting to connect community, and like you're really wanting to find ways to connect with people, whether that's through personal stories or through the faith. And so like what about that connection and that belonging and that sense of community, like where did that desire come from, and what have you learned about belonging throughout all of these experiences and projects that you've made?
That's a really good question.
Thank you. High praise.
I don't know. I literally don't know. Like, it's just, I crave that, like some people are driven by achievement, and like, yes, I'm a high achiever, and yes, I'm very ambitious, and I care about accomplishing things and also about making things at the highest level of my craft, and being recognized for that. But I think what really fulfills me in life is feeling like I am seen and seeing God in someone else. And that can happen in small group settings. That can happen in the context of like a romantic relationship. That can happen with my family, or that can happen through like the stories that I tell and the audiences that I'm able to connect with. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's because I left my home at a very young age. Maybe because I'm the oldest child in my family, maybe it's because I haven't really gotten to know my history and culture that deeply, like I wonder like what it is like for you guys, because I think it's really hard to be in the United States part of a new immigrant community, like not an immigrant community that's been here for ages and has gotten to like establish infrastructure to help kids learn about their culture, or not just kids, but like people learn about their culture and like get really deeply acquainted with it, and celebrate it. Like we don't have that,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really fair point. I mean, you look at more established European centric cultures that have been in US or Canada for generations and generations, it's part of the fabric, right? But if we are kind of first or second generation immigrants, we're part of creating that story. So It's yeah. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but it's interesting because you look around within your own kind of friend circles, and for me, I've got friends who are very, very proud Pakistanis, and friends who are very kind of, for lack of a better word, whitewashed, and then some level of in betweenness,
Yeah.
but. But it's always kind of that balance and struggle, it's like that idea of, kind of goes back to that same central thing. It's like, we are not just one category, right? And trying to figure out how you balance the American or Canadian side of your kind of persona with your cultural, kind of heritage, with your religion, and so on and so forth. It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's also the question of like, and I think this is the question that I was like wrestling with in beginner, right? Like, what do you keep and what do you leave behind? And like, what implications does it have when you don't keep certain things? Like, if you aren't this in a conservative, practicing Orthodox kind of way, what do you lose as a result of that? Or if you marry somebody who doesn't speak your language, I mean, the chances of your children not speaking your language are so much higher, like,
yeah,
I think those are,
I also,
yeah.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just gonna say, I also think there's like an actual difference between the U.S. and Canada as it relates to this, right? Like, you learn from like an elementary school perspective, like the idea of a melting pot versus a cultural mosaic, right? I mean, the U.S. is very much about a melting pot, and American first, and you try to adapt American values when you move to and immigrate to the country, whereas Canada is very much about celebrating the cultural mosaic. On paper, right? Whether or not that's in practice is a different conversation. But I think there's definitely, myself having lived in both the US and Canada, I think I could definitely see that difference, in that in Canada, there's much more of an acceptance of celebrating your cultural heritage. I don't know, Sophie, if you agree or disagree with that, but
I think like you need to be in an environment that allows you to do so safely, which doesn't exist everywhere. But I would agree though, like there's more of an inclination towards that for sure. Yeah. But I also want to ask, so like this is like with Tell Them I Am, and you had a chance to interview some like really, really incredible people. And what was that experience like for you as a Muslim woman, interviewing all these Muslim people that you may have been inspired by? Like, did it change your perspective on anything?
Oh my God, so many things. But most of all, like, I didn't realize that in trying to get other people to fall in love with these people through the stories, that I was going to fall in love with all these people. Like, you are sitting there on the opposite side of the microphone and you're asking questions that people have never been asked before. Like, something we don't realize is like famous people are asked the same questions over and over and over again. And even,
totally.
Yeah, like even giving someone the space to be like, well, what is something that's defined you, is such an unusual question to ask. So having that privilege was just frankly incredible. There are many days that I like cried from the weight of the experience. When I interviewed Dina Haggag, I felt more seen than I have ever felt in my entire life.
Wow.
Talking to Akbar Ahmed was like it took me days to shake that, like I couldn't even edit that tape right away because I was like, and we were on deadline, so I had to, but I just was like, this was too profound. Like I am forever changed by every single one of those interviews. Salman Agha, who I think he goes by like Salman Agha, but I feel like it was so hard to break him and like get him to start talking about deeper things that like really had an impact on him. But in the process of him opening up about that and us, again, having the privilege to do that with him, like we felt so much closer. Like these people feel like family in a weird way. So I am always conscious of the responsibility and the weight of having that kind of interview with people who otherwise are in the public eye, and don't always get to open up about things like that, and knowing that those stories have to be treated with kindness and respect and kept safe. in how I deal with them as a podcast producer and sound designer. There was also this experience of getting to know people who wear the hijab on a deeper level and realizing that I probably had some biases against hijabis. And unpacking that and really learning that like I shouldn't judge people for that or assume things about who they are just because they wear a hijab. And that's something that I feel like I'm still learning and unpacking and becoming comfortable with.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so incredible how you mentioned like you treated these stories almost like they were sacred. And that's really cool. And I think that like not a lot of people do that. Like I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, will just ask kind of really superficial questions or kind of like questions that we anticipate are going to be asked as an audience. And I really love that you don't do that. And I really love that there's like so much more to storytelling when you're involved. Like that's a really cool thing to listen to, and I appreciate that so much about like everything that I've.
But so I agree. I agree with everything that Sophia just said, but I do have a but, and I want to ask the question. I want to ask the but question. I could have phrased that better. Okay, so you'd mentioned, because earlier you'd said that, initially you wanted to do this other conversation and this other topic around the Quran Book Club, but the requirement was there to introduce people to this more normalized idea of who Muslims can be. Do you think that if the intended audience of the podcast and I'm speaking specifically for the Tell Them I Am, if the intended audience is a broader community, do you think that is the hope, maybe I'll frame it this way, is the hope that the conversations that you have in these 15 minutes will then inspire people to learn more about these individuals, or is it enough to just have this conversation and then say, oh, okay, like there are these pivotal moments in Muslim people's lives, and that hopefully is enough to get them to the table for future projects?
I think that they are two separate endeavors driven by maybe the same impulse. So I think that the goal with Tell Them I Am is to help people who are Muslim realize that there are a lot of different kinds of Muslims, especially Muslims who maybe are very judgmental or feel very alone in questioning their faith or practicing it in a different way, or having a different kind of relationship to their identity. So I think the goal with Tell Them I Am is to help people feel less alone who are Muslim, or for those Muslims who feel judgmental to like crack at that a little bit and be like, look, these people are human too. And for non-Muslims to get to know somebody without the layers and barriers of like, when you see a hijabi woman, like you're going to assume certain things about her. Or when you see a man who looks noticeably Middle Eastern, or even a Black man who happens to be Muslim, you're going to automatically assume certain things about them. But when you hear their voice and you right away jump to something that is deeply personal and relatable and beautiful, like you will get to know them in a different kind of way. And so the hope is that even for these like liberal Karens who like think that they're not racist, but may have like some barriers in their heart, like to crack at those, but maybe even like to reach the person who outwardly hates Muslims, or sees them as one-dimensional demons that must be like driven out of this country. I don't know how we're going to reach those people. That's really the goal with season 2. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to extricate the show out of KPCC and retain ownership over it. But that's the goal with season 2, is to reach an even broader audience and get people to really love, if not love, understand and relate to Muslims as humans. With something like the Quran Book Club, I think I would be amazed and so thankful if people who listen to Tell Them I Am come to the Quran Book Club. I don't necessarily see those audiences as like 100% overlap, right? Like you have those like Venn diagrams. Like I think there is very much an audience of the Quran Book Club that wouldn't listen to Tell Them I Am, and very much an audience of Tell Them I Am that wouldn't watch the Quran Book Club. And that I think applies to both Muslims and non-Muslims. I bet I will get way more haters for the Quran book club than I ever did for Tell Them I Am, because it just all automatically you're delving into more controversial territory, and you're opening up like interpretation of faith as like a realm that we're going to dive into. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that because it has implications on how they live their life. It's not just about getting to know somebody else's life. It's about something that you have held to be true forever that may or may not be interpreted that way by someone else, So I think that the goals are different, but again, the driving force is to shed some doubt and shed some light and like open people's hearts.
Can you tell us about like what made you want to start Dustlight Productions and even where the name Dustlight came from and like what you're hoping to do? And then of course your super cool project, the Michelle Obama podcast. Tell us all of it.
What am I doing with Dustlight Productions? Where does that name come from? The name, well, when I tripped on acid.
I think we found our teaser.
Yeah. The greatest start to any story ever.
When I had that experience, I, as one does, I looked at the stars at night and they looked really beautiful and they were dancing in this like amazing circular, magnificent pattern. And the next morning, as the effects of the drug were wearing off, I remember looking at dust lit by the sun and and realizing that it looked literally just like the stars, and being so moved by that like dust in sunlight is literally just as beautiful as like one of the things that we consider the most miraculous, magnificent things that we experience as humans, And I always wanted to create a production company that centers what I like to call like the new mainstream, which is like not white people narratives from a white lens, but stories that don't get a lot of attention. And often those are called like marginalized people. And I hate that like very like political term. And I wanted to say that in a more beautiful way. And so that's where Dustlight came from. It also is deeply influenced by Sufi poetry because dust is a metaphor, and light and dust are both metaphors that are used in Sufi poetry over and over again, and actually are metaphors that are used in the Quran over and over again too. So just this idea of like humility when it comes to like us being created from dust or being nothing like dust, but also the magnificence and the brilliance of then having the spotlight shown upon these insignificant things and realizing just how terribly beautiful they are. So that's where the name comes from.
That was so poetic. Also, my favorite thing that a story that started with when I tripped on acid had a reference to the Quran, and now it's all related.
If that isn't a promotion for acid, I don't know what is.
Not that that's awesome. What we're doing here.
Yeah.
Lawyers, listen.
Hamad is not on the mic. He can just hear us, and he was just like, "What is going on over there?" But it's okay.
Wait, just you wait. You're in for a treat.
So tell us a little bit about how not to pivot too hard, but tell us a little bit about how the opportunity came about to be the executive producer for Michelle Obama's podcast through Dustlight.
Yeah. So I created Dustlight because I felt like the kind of creative environment that I wanted, which was like a Pixar of podcasting, like really just didn't exist, and felt like I had to just create it. I also was hit by a car on September 11th in 2019 as a pedestrian.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, totally crazy story for another time, but almost died and kind of like,
oh my gosh.
Wait, where was this? Is there like a Cole's Notes version of the story?
Yeah, this was outside of work at the time in Pasadena. Just walking to get a coffee, and this elderly man lost control of his car and hit a couple of pedestrians, me included. So that experience was kind of like, okay, sure, I could wait another couple of years, or I could just do this now. So that's kind of where Dustlight really came to life. And shortly after that, I was approached by a really good friend of mine, Mukta Mohan, who is the VP of audio at Higher Ground, which is the Obama's production company. And she asked if me and my collaborator, Arwen Nix, would be interested in meeting with her and Dan Fierman, who is the head of audio at Higher Ground. And we met and we really hit it off. And we were super mission aligned. And they asked us to make the Michelle Obama podcast, which was very much in line with the kind of stuff that we want to be doing at Dustlight. And so we said yes and have been working on it since roughly February. And I am crazy excited for everybody to listen to it because it's really beautiful.
That's awesome. And when that comes out later this month?
Yeah, the first episode drops July 29th.
Yes. Okay. Cool. So that's pretty cool. And like, so I don't know, I was gonna.
Yeah, that's very
I'm
cool.
I don't know what else to. That's like the coolest thing I've ever heard, and I feel like anything I say about it will be like.
Also, just as like a frame of reference, when Misha and I were trying to figure out a time to record this episode, she literally told me that she's working like 21 hours a day. She's like, "Oh, I'm busy between the hours of 4 a.m. and 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if we can figure something out between that gap, that would be great." I was like, "Oh, what?"
Just wake up in the
now
middle
it
of
makes
the
sense
night.
why you're working so hard.
Yeah, that could have been fun though, like a midnight
Yeah.
snack of a
I feel like she
Monsters
needs to
Halal
sleep at
Gab
some
episode.
point, too.
Yeah.
Oh my God, guys, I have actually, honestly, I do not have any time to sleep, but the last couple of days, even though I've still had deadlines, I have just found myself falling asleep in the middle of the day for like hours at a time because we just went too hard, and nobody asked us to. I think we were so wanting to make something that is worthy of the person who is the host of this show. And it's our first show as a production company. And we really wanted to do right by everyone involved. So,
Oh, I can imagine.
I was gonna say, not to mention, this is not the only thing I'm doing. So that's also the other part of it is like keeping the company afloat and running other shows and, also other projects like Quran Book Club and setting those up for success and trying to figure out how I am. So it's been more on my plate than I've ever had in my entire life.
Yeah. I feel like if anybody has like 30 seconds to spare, go to Misha Euceph's website and read her full bio, and you will be just
So
humbled
impressed,
more than anything. Yeah. Well, we want to so we like to end our episodes with some rapid fire questions.
Cool.
So we're gonna try to do that and squeeze that into your last 15 minutes if that's cool.
Yes.
Let's do it.
So basically, we're just going to come at you with these questions. You answer the first thing that pops into your head. And there's no right or wrong answer.
Great.
Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it. Okay. Number 1. Who is your dream podcast guest? This is someone that you haven't had a chance to interview yet.
Dave Chappelle.
Oh, great
Very
answer. Los Angeles or New York?
Los Angeles, 1,000%.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
damn.
All right.
Okay.
What's the most binge-worthy show that's streaming right now? Any platform.
I May Destroy You.
Wait, what is that?
Oh, I thought you were saying that to him.
Wait.
Not that was the name of the show. I was like, oh shit, Sikandar, she's coming for you.
Wait, or was that a statement? Now I'm confused.
No, you have to watch this. She is like the new Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Like, it's not binge-worthy because it's being released weekly, which is very annoying, but it is binge-worthy in what it is.
Wait, what is it on? What platform?
It's a very hard
or channel?
I think it's Prime, HBO. I think it's HBO.
Okay.
I don't know.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Cool. But it's called I May Destroy You.
Yes, it's brilliant.
Okay.
Actually about well, it's not really about sexual assault. I think it's like about sexual boundaries. But it is so real and fresh and well written and well acted, and the soundtrack is gorgeous. And it's the writer and creator of it is a Black woman. But that's like not the whole thing. That it's not about like being Black. Like I think even Insecure sometimes can be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Cool.
Okay. Adding it to the list.
Yeah. All right. What is your favorite type of potato?
Sweet. Japanese sweet potato.
Oh.
The white kind.
Fair enough.
Okay. Do
I don't think I've ever had a white
Japanese
potato.
sweet potato?
Like with
That's
the
so
purple.
bougie. I'm
Maybe
into
you-
it. Okay.
It is very bougie. I know, guys. I know.
I love that.
And do you just eat it like in its natural form? Do you mash it? What do you do?
Yeah, and you roast it with skin on. You can like double roast it or fry and roast it.
Interesting. Okay.
Interesting.
Sophia's always trying to get potato recipes out of this podcast.
Yeah, just tell me how you eat your potatoes so I can add new things.
Okay, most rewatched. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You got more potato commentary?
Yeah, I just want to know where this question came from.
So, okay, I will tell this story.
There's an
Actually,
origin.
that's fair. Like, there's an origin story to this, and people are probably wondering. So, basically, I love potatoes. They're like my favorite food group in any shape or form. Like, you mash it, you scallop it, you fries it, you waffle fries it. Like, I'm down, I'm there. And so we were like having this conversation as a board one time, as a Mosquers board, and somehow it came out that Sikandar, he's like, I hate potatoes.
I never said, whoa, I never said I hate potatoes. I just said, they're kind of overrated at times.
Listen, he's playing it down now because he's gotten so much hate
I don't think
over
I've ever
the
used
years.
the H word, but
But he dislikes potatoes, and so I was like,
of calories.
I feel like serial killers hate potatoes, and like they're the only group that does. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But then we've had one other guest on this podcast who was like, I was like, what's your favorite kind of potato? He's like, none. And Sikandar had like the best day of his life.
It was Mustafa Ali, Adil Alam. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a WWE wrestler, and he's my new.
I do know him. I interviewed him for a Secret Life of Muslims like event a while.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Such
You
an
watched
awesome dude.
that, yeah.
And he also is not a
Yeah,
huge
so
fan
he
of
doesn't like potatoes. So it's not, he's not alone, but like
but there's a few.
it still weirds me out.
Yeah. Can I
Anyway, that's where the question came from.
say something really important about potatoes?
Yes.
Sweet potato fries are not French fries. Can we just agree on that? Or
Yes, we can.
I agree. They're far superior.
no?
Right? That's where you're going.
No.
With that?
No, they're not. I would have a regular fry over a sweet potato fry any day.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Any
to
day.
each their own. To each their own.
Yeah. So there's not welcome here.
We're
Okay.
fired.
Next. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
See yourself out of our potato
Kamala, you're taking over from
conversation.
now on. Yeah. Okay. Most rewatched movie.
Back to the Future.
Nice.
Number one. Or all of them.
All of them.
Okay.
Watch
Fair enough.
one when you watch that. That's ridiculous.
It
Fair point.
has to do it in a set.
Yeah.
And then lastly, what was your favorite skill that you learned doing beginner?
Wow, this is a hard one. Scoring, I would say.
Right on.
Nice.
I think that was while making the podcast. What about in terms of skills, like swimming and
Oh my
riding a
God.
bike, like that?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I was like, I think she got a little too deep there.
Sorry, guys. It happens sometimes with me. What was my favorite skill? What did I even learn in beginner? I would say riding a bike was probably the best one because I just realized that I actually was really good at it. Like I just was scared, but then I could ride 26 miles and it was really fun.
Nice.
Whereas swimming, I feel like you have to just practice so much to actually become a good swimmer to be able to freely swim all the time, like in the ocean and stuff,
Makes sense. Okay, well, Misha, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome, and like I said, there's countless more hours of conversation that we could have with you based around all of your incredible achievements. So thank you for being a part of our little podcast here. We can only hope to aspire to your level one day. Before we let you go, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Euceph, or you could just Google me. MishaEuceph.com is my website, and that should have a lot of stuff. And then Dustlight.co is the production company's website where all of our new shows will be available.
Awesome.
And for those who are listening, Misha's last name is spelled in the most incredible way possible. So it's Meuceph. It'll be on our podcast, but it's awesome.
My dad gets credit for that one.
Did he actually change that when he moved to America?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah.
So what was the old spelling?
Like
normal?
US,
Yeah.
probably. Or
Why
something.
you something boring?
That's such a flex. Your dad seems amazing.
Yeah. Back to the Future and changing names.
Amazing. Okay,
Awesome.
Misha, thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was so much fun for me.
Yeah, thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Halal Gap. You can find us online by searching Mosquers Film Festival on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
We hope you can join us next time. Special shout out to Fatima for always having to deal with these crazy edits at the end of this episode.
Yes,
All right.
Sorry we don't have our stuff together.